Yeah. But good evening, everyone. Please call me Eddie. Um, I just thought of something to add to what Doc was saying. Another example that we live with every day in terms of harm reduction. Your Coke Zero, it's a form of harm reduction, right? When they introduced the sugar tax and so on, it was mainly for the obese people, for the diabetes, and so on. So it is a form of. So we live with harm reduction every single day, whether you have a 0% or 0.5% alcohol drink, it's a form of harm reduction. Yeah. So it's not a concept that is new. I think Doc summed it up very well. So I'm not going to dwell so much into the gentleman who we call the father of tobacco harm reduction. That's Michael Russell, um, who, as Doc said, people seek nicotine, but they die from tar, right? Nicotine in itself, it's not harmful. There's not proven evidence to show any harm with nicotine. And that's the misconception. A lot of people think it causes cancer. It doesn't. This has been proven. And I'll go into my slides now to just show you some evidence and some well known, respected institutions of cancer research globally that have demystified that. Um, could you? Thank you. Uh, Next. Okay. So there are two principles to harm reduction or THR. We like acronyms, right? So follow me when I say THR, tobacco harm reduction. What you need first is a product. You need people to move to a product that is going to give the same satisfaction as your cigarette does, right? Um, and so vaping product is exactly that. Your snooze is exactly that. It's a delivery system. Your Nicorette is exactly that. It's a delivery system to give you the nicotine without the 7,000 harmful chemicals that are released when you combust. And you need smokers to completely switch to those products. So one of the things that I'll come to is how many, of these um, governments and countries that have transitioned, I think, and put the right regulatory frameworks in place and encourage people. And you see those stats reducing the smoking rates. It's not just Sweden, it's many other countries. Um, so, next one. So, like I say, nicotine. Let's demystify it. Nicotine is, what can I compare it with? Caffeine, right? We are addicted to caffeine. It's the same thing. Same way or physiological effect that you would get from your caffeine. So nicotine in itself, it's a naturally produced compound. How many of you had potatoes today? Tomatoes, eggplants. Okay, I'm going too far. But you get nicotine in all those vegetables that you eat every day. Did you know that? You get nicotine from potatoes, you get nicotine from tomatoes. Although at very low amounts, nicotine is there. It's a naturally occurring compound that we consume on an everyday basis. So, how do we say that it's harmful if we consume it every day, right? Um, what's going on? Okay, that's fine. So this has been demonstrated or talked about by, like Doc said, the Royal College of Physicians in London, in the UK, the WHO, by the way, in itself, would say or promote your Nicorette. However, when it comes to your vapor products or your e-cigarettes, it now is contrary to that. So there's been many organizations. The International Agency for Cancer Research has come out to say nicotine is not harmful. It is addictive. And trust me, to get somebody off smoking is tough. That's why you get people that always relapse, right? It's very tough for somebody to completely quit. Doc can tell you. Yep. Next. Mhm. So, what is in this e-cigarette that we talk about? Typically, um, the device itself is made of three core parts. Yeah, battery, an atomizer, and an e-liquid. In that e-liquid, there are, as Doc said, a few ingredients: propylene glycol, or vegetable glycerine, water, nicotine, and flavorings. That's it. Yep. And you can have those that do not have nicotine. So typically, what people do is that they would start, yes, with the highest strength of nicotine, especially those that smoke quite heavily. They will start with the higher strength and then wind down. I know a lot of people that have wind down to zero nicotine e-cigarettes, but suddenly completely no need for nicotine. So it is effective in that way, right? One thing is that there is no tobacco in e-cigarettes or in that e-liquids, none whatsoever. Yep. There's no smoke, there's no ash. Yep. So in terms of the framework and what we need to do. Evidence exists already. And to this day, I'm surprised that you still get people that say we don't know enough about e cigarettes. There is plenty of evidence. Whether you look at the chemistry, the toxicology, whether you look at the behavior, the PKPD, this is pharmacokinetics, and how the body reacts back to the nicotine. There's plenty of evidence in that space. Clinical exposure. Um, we know about the cancer that nicotine doesn't cause cancer. And there has been population studies, or at least associations that you see in several countries, where the uptake of these products, you see less and less smoking rates, but more importantly, you see disease being reduced in those countries, or tobacco related diseases being reduced in those countries. So there's certainly associations at population level for this. Um, when COVID started, we did not know much about um, uh, what we're going to do to curb the spread or the transmission of COVID. What we started with was modeling studies, which we accepted of how we should do things. There has been modeling studies that actually show, even for South Africa, Germany, US, Canada, and so on, that actually show that if you switch people completely from cigarettes to e-liquids, to e-cigarettes, you are able to save millions and millions and able to reach your targets, your WHO targets of less than 5% smoking rates in the country. So evidence is there. It's just somehow deliberately being left out. If you look at the tobacco bill as it stands and you look at the references that are put there or embedded in there for this bill, none of them speak to this part. None of them, deliberately so. And there's plenty of it. If we go next. So, as Doc said, back in 2014, a professor called Professor Nutt proposed this modeling, right? It's a spectrum of looking at different products that you get nicotine from. From the most harmful or extreme toxicity would be your combustibles. So the brown that you see here, these are combustibles. Your cigarettes, your cigars, your water pipes, and so on. Extreme toxicity. And then as you move to the left, and this is scientifically proven, right? As you move to the left, you get the less harmful. And that includes on the far, your snus, which Doc talked about, your e-cigarettes, your nasal sprays, your nicotine pouches, which are fairly new in the markets, and your patches and so on. Now, what's important to realize with this is that also there is evidence that has been shown that there is no difference in side effects, or SAEs as we call them, serious adverse effects, when you compare your nicotine patches, which are approved here in South Africa by SAPRA, to your nicotine pouches, for example, right? So the concern about, I think the main concern currently is youth uptake that we should worry about. And I think the industry has been forthcoming to say, yes, they are not against the regulations, but the right regulation and appropriate regulations have to be put in place and be science or evidence-based. It's a big problem. We see it every day with youth uptake. And that's the mechanisms that needs to be put in place. No child should be under 18 should be taking up e-cigarettes or vaping. No child under 18 should be, or no adult smoker, non-smoker should be taking, because nicotine is addictive after all. So the encouragement is that it should be for over 18s, and it should be for those adult smokers that are finding it hard to quit. There's plenty of evidence. I've just put a few that could fit into the slide that actually show that the reduction in toxicants are between 82 to 99%, right? And this is measuring those chemicals that have been deemed by the WHO or the FDA. So you take a cigarette and you take an e-cigarette and you measure the constituents between the two using that list. Over 82%, some studies reporting over 99% reduction in those harmful constituents that you find in cigarettes. Yep. There has been of recent biomarker studies. So a biomarker is a marker of disease. Oops. It's a marker of disease. So, for example, if you get an infection, how do they tell that you have an infection? There's a biological response and something you can measure to say, dog has this infection, for example, right? There's biomarkers for cardiovascular disease, there's biomarkers for lung disease, there's biomarkers for COPD, and so on. So biomarkers have been measured in many, many studies as well that show actually that a non-smoker and a person that uses e-cigarette actually have the same levels of biomarkers in terms of tobacco-related diseases. Again, Public Health England, one thing I need to mention, in the UK, when was it, 2022, the UK incentivized people and provided over 1 million e-cigarettes just to encourage people to get off smoking. If you look at the UK results right now, they are heading towards the Swedish experience as well. And that's because they allow these products to be firstly accessible, to be available, and to be affordable, right? If you see here, in terms of the UK, you can see in the blue would be your sales for e-cigarettes. Sorry, in the blue, it's your combustible cigarettes. And in the red or orange here, you can see the uptake. And you can see some association, or at least a trend, that with the uptake of your cigarettes, you actually, your e-cigarettes, you actually reduce your FMC sales. This has happened for different products. Sweden with oral nicotine pouches or snus. In Japan with THP, which is a tobacco-heated product. In New Zealand, they legalized and regulated vaping in 2020. And since then, they've had a 4.3 decline in smoking rates from 2020 to 2023. Even applying the Empower recommended by the WHO, you would never see such a significant reduction in smoking rates. And that's because the government realized that encouraging and putting the right regulations and demystifying these products would lead to this. In the UK, I've just given an example in the UK what their regulatory framework is. They categorize it as a tobacco product, but they don't excise it. We've got excise here. You put excise on a product, it becomes unaffordable. Remember the 3 A's I said: accessible, affordable, available. We've got excise here in South Africa. The UK didn't. Health warnings are important because you have to talk about the addictiveness of nicotine. You have to warn people about the addictiveness of nicotine. They allow all flavors. They've got a cap on the concentration of your nicotine. But these are things that should be embedded in the current regulatory framework. We've spoken about Sweden again, just to reiterate, 5.6% smoking rates in Sweden. Yep. I had to give one more example where it's the opposite. You look at Brazil, another example is Australia, right? When you put restrictive measures, strict measures, you actually get the opposite effect. Never mind the illicit market that you're gonna have an issue with in country, but you get youth uptake, you get people smoking or vaping what they don't know is in there. So that creates a flourish of that market. As I said, it's difficult to get off nicotine, right? But at least give leeway and the right regulatory framework for these products to be accessible. But in summary, there is high certainty of evidence that there's one more study I didn't talk about here, and it's the Cochrane Review that speaks about a comparison between e-cigarettes as well as nicotine replacement therapy. And there is high certainty that using e-cigarettes, people get off smoking better than they would using NRTs. It's a fact. This is a Cochrane review, the highest level of evidence when we speak about hierarchy of science. There's reduced toxicant studies that exist, reduced markers of disease that has been demonstrated for these products. The safety profile is similar to NRTs, and you've seen positive outcomes in terms of those countries that have embraced the concept of harm reduction. Yes, it is needed. Regulation is needed here in South Africa. But let's sit at the table. Let's make it science or evidence-based regulation. A one-size-fits-all by the WHO does not work. The same bill that we see here is the same bill that you would see in Uganda, in many other countries. It does not work. You need an augmented regulatory framework, and you need to embrace these products into that framework. There's an opportunity, and I'm glad Doc is here and is an MP to make some changes or some noise from within. But there is an opportunity for South Africa to curb the smoking rates. Our goal towards the 2040 of having less than 5%, we're not going to reach it. I can tell you, the smoking rates for South Africa keep going up. And we need to embrace these products in order to have a better future for our South Africans or our smokers. Thank you so much.